Greetings. Again, this is Father Brendan Helms, priest in charge at St. Monica's Anglo-Catholic Church. As noted in the last video, what we are wanting to do is just have a conversation around really the why those of us that identify as Anglo-Catholics are Anglo-Catholics. And I'm just going to start with a little bit of my journey on what brought me to where I am today. I grew up in what I would largely describe as an evangelical Protestant background. Not any specific denominational beliefs that I would just strictly underpin. That being said, as I finished my undergraduate at Appalachian State University at Boone, North Carolina, I did inter-seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina at Southern Evangelical Seminary. And that was largely driven by just a conversation that I had while a student at Appalachian State. I was at my apartment and got a knock on the door, and I can't even remember now whether it was Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, but it struck a conversation between myself and the missionaries. And in that conversation, I won't say I was totally unprepared for the dialogue, but I certainly felt that the responses I had were inadequate. So I began conversations of how to change that and enrolled at Southern Evangelical Seminary, as I said, Charlotte, North Carolina, largely out of a friendship with, at that time, a professor at Southern Evangelical Seminary that I had known for many years, Dr. Wayne Detzler, a very godly man that I knew through my father. So went to SES, and SES, a evangelical school, but as an evangelical school, very highly influenced by Thomas Aquinas. And there was no doubt about it that while being at SES, there was going to be a heavy pouring on of St. Thomas. And by the end of my time at SES, I was certainly, I would probably, looking back on it now, identify myself within the category of being an evangelical Thomist, at least in the philosophical, maybe broadly philosophical theology positions. But I certainly, at that time at least, would have stopped my endorsement of Thomas, probably regarding matters of salvation, certainly matters of the sacraments, broader views of the church, things like that. But when it came to thinking about, what is a human, who is God, who is Jesus, I would have, at that time, certainly put myself into the category of endorsing St. Thomas's teaching. As I moved forward, I continued to read St. Thomas and began attending as a layman an Anglican church in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was All Saints Anglican Church within the ACNA, a great parish. I was introduced to the parish by one of my professors and mentor, who's now with the Lord, Dr. Barry Leventhal. And in that, again, I would put my introduction to Anglicanism. Again, it was looking back on it, and it's not meant to be pejorative in any sense. It was low church Anglicanism, certainly a bent towards Reformation Anglicanism. And then I got married to my wife, Elizabeth. We moved to Concord, North Carolina, and that began a further transition towards being Anglo-Catholic. And again, but it was a journey. I would look at it as many steps along the way. But it was really, when I look back on it, when I look to St. Thomas and I look to the liturgy that I had been introduced to in an Anglican life, it really began to push me back to the fathers of the church. And it really forced me to ask questions of my theological positions of, do my positions, are they found in the church fathers? Or are my positions that I hold only found amongst the Protestant reformers and the Church of Modernity? And there were certainly many beliefs that I held that were only endorsed by the modern church that I felt compelled to correct. Again, and when we look to Scripture and we see that the church is going to stand against all, it compelled me to rethink many of those positions. And when I began to look to the fathers of the church, it forced me to reevaluate my position, and specifically to think about, is it more likely that I am correct living 2,000 years after Christ and the apostles, or that these men and bishops of the church that would have known apostles like John and Paul and Peter, that they were correct? I certainly, at this point in time, think that it is more likely that those that knew the apostles were correct. And of course, they're men; they're gonna make mistakes. But when we see, again, even when the apostles are correcting the early church, they are there as the apostles to correct them. Again, and then we see as the apostles identify those leaders that will come after them, the initial bishops, and we see this succession develop. And we see in the early church the sacraments. We see unquestionably in a very early time period within the church certain doctrinal beliefs established that, as I looked back on it, I was like, well, these beliefs that the early church embraced that are in accord with Scripture are not what I hold to. And that's what began to further and further push me towards what I would now identify as an Anglo-Catholic position. And that allows me to fully embrace the sacraments, because as a Thomist, I've always embraced the significance of the body-soul unity. And as I looked at my beliefs as a broadly evangelical Protestant, I saw that my worship environment was predominantly a spiritualized view. It didn't take my bodily sense experience serious. But as a Thomist, that was something that I was compelled to take serious. And I found in the liturgy and in the sacraments this intimate connection between the unity of the body and soul that, as I reflect back on my Protestant evangelical background, it was not in full accord with that Thomistic understanding of what it means to be a human. And if what it means to be a human is not in accord with what I'm doing on a Sunday, that should raise questions for us, and it certainly did for me. And that's what, again, just further pushed me a little bit more down that line. And then, of course, through studying of various fathers, reading of the Oxford movement scholars in England in the 1800s, seeing these individuals who took very, very serious what the church taught prior to the Reformation, but at the same time, still not accepting certain dogmas of Rome that, at least for myself, I would identify as not wanting to fully embrace. Though there's certain dogmas that, though I may not personally embrace them, certainly can be embraced as an act of devotion. But these Oxford movement scholars very much allow us to, or help us to understand how we can fully embrace what the church, how the church existed before the Protestant Reformation in a manner that gives full validity, endorsement to the historic ancient church, and doesn't force me to throw my intellect away. It doesn't, it allows me to be part of a corporate body of the church that is visible. It is tangible. It's not just this merely spiritual version of the church. It's tied to through thousands of years of the church. And we can look back and see a connection between the church in Ephesus in 300, and we can see a church in Oxford in the 1300s, and we can look to the church today here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area region, and there's an intimate connection of line that I would contend for when I look back at my Protestant evangelical background. That church environment doesn't connect, at least to the same extent that the church in Ephesus existed in the 300s, the church in the Middle Ages, the church even in Beijing, China today, because it's not part of a united Catholic Church tied to apostolic succession, tied to the unity of the church through that line that goes through the sacraments as well. And so again, that's just a little bit of my experience. And again, everybody's thoughts and journey. Again, of course, there's those who probably were born within an Anglo-Catholic environment. And we certainly would want to, as we go through this series, include some of their thoughts as well. But that's it for me today. I hope you all have a blessed rest of the day. Thank you.